Good evening. Welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources that we hope will help improve your life. I'm Stu Reid. Here with my co-host, Dave Burstein. Hey, Dave.
Hello.
How you doing?
Much better now that I'm connected.
Okay. We've got a very special guest with us today. We're going to hear from her after I think we're going to do a little bit of news, Tech Talk news. But let me just mention Miss Jenna Leventoff. Jenna is a senior policy counsel with Public Knowledge, a 501c3 not-for-profit that promotes freedom of expression, an open internet, and access to affordable communications tools and creative works. There, Jenna focuses on government affairs. Jenna received her JD cum laude and BA from Case Western Reserve in my hometown, Cleveland, Ohio. Jenna, welcome to Community Technology.
I have to say, I've got a conflict of interest that we must put on the record. Jenna worked with my sister-in-law's brother-in-law, Harold Feld, who I've introduced as the most effective policy advocate in Washington, D.C. Free Press is an important organization. I even occasionally send them a little bit of money.
Okay, so he's connected how, Dave?
It is my sister-in-law's brother-in-law. Okay. And I didn't even know him till we bumped into each other in policy circles. Free press is important. And please, senators, approve Gigi Sohn. Jenna, could you explain what that's about?
Sure. So the Federal Communications Commission has five commissioners that vote. Typically, the president's party gets 3 commissioners and the other party gets 2. However, all the commissioners have to go through a Senate confirmation process after they're nominated by the president. So President Biden nominated Gigi Sohn a long time ago, and she is just not getting through the confirmation process because they haven't held a vote on her for whatever reason that may be. And so until we have Gigi confirmed, it's going to be really difficult to actually get things done at the commission because unless it's strictly bipartisan, there aren't enough votes.
Well, Jessica at the commission is an extraordinary politician, and she's managed to get a whole lot through, but there are some big things hanging, and I wish they confirmed Gigi. It's absolutely a matter of she's a strong consumer advocate, as she was when she was at Free Press. And there's a whole lot of companies who do not want a strong consumer advocate in power. I mean, when you look at all the trouble that's been happening in antitrust lately with the new FTC and with Tim Wu in the White House, they don't like it. Back to news. First thing, strongly recommend nobody buys an Apple right now. The new iPhone is set to come on September 7th. And we just got news that the new iPad and iPad Pro are going to launch in October. Question for either of you. What % of phone sales do you think are iPhones?
42%.
I didn't believe it till I looked at the numbers about 2 years ago. It's over 55% in the United States.
Wow.
Now, almost all the iPhones are now 5G, which means that 5G is now 65 or 70% of the phones sold in the United States and is taking over. It still does nothing important, but it definitely, us in the industry have got to be aware of that. Next, there is a Zoom flaw that allows a hacker to completely take over your Macintosh. Upgrade immediately. Now, next, DEFCON, all kinds of hacks were put. One of the most interesting is the hack on John Deere tractors, which dominates the market for tractors. They jailbroke the hardware. just like we do on cell phones, in order to add some software. An Australian who goes by the handle zip codes showed off a way to fully take control of some John Deere farm machine electronics and ran Doom, a first-person shooter game, on the tractor. That's more than a joke, because farmers are up in arms about Deere's refusal to let them fix their own tractors.
Wait, run that back again, Dave. I don't quite understand. Somebody took over the operation of a tractor? I mean, I missed it.
Somebody went into the computer, which has a small monitor in the tractor, and got it playing Doom.
Okay.
On the tractor's computer.
Okay.
Now, I don't think that's important by itself, but it may allow farmers to actually repair their own tractors and maybe even buy parts from somebody other than John Deere. A classic example of the right to repair stuff. Jenna, have you seen the right to repair issue?
I have, yeah.
What are we hearing from Washington? I know some of the states have been moving on it.
Washington has been, excuse me, Washington's been decidedly quiet on the right to repair. We were expecting some movement in Congress that just got postponed.
And almost everything now has stopped in Congress, probably until after the elections. Okay, important story that's affecting a lot of people in a lot of places. Salma al-Shibab, a student at Leeds University from Saudi Arabia, was charged with following and retreating dissidents and activists when she went home on vacation to Saudi Arabia. She has now been incarcerated for 32 years for her tweets.
Where is this, Dave?
In Saudi Arabia,
Uh-huh.
somebody who is not particularly political, but retweeted some political tweets that we're talking about, has been served to serve 34 years in prison.
Wow.
Because she caused public unrest and destabilized civil and national security. That is the nature of Saudi Arabia. I'm sure that if you think back, you can find loads of other, but that is really extreme. Now, Saudi Arabia has become a strong ally of the United States now. Joe Biden went there, shook hands. We're sending billions of dollars of arms there. And it makes it foolish for the United States to turn around and talk about our strong support for democracy. And I think that's enough news there.
Well, Dave, before you go, is that relationship with Saudi Arabia really new? I mean, in my sense, we've been staunch allies for decades, no? Ever since the, I'm talking about going back to the oil crisis. I mean, we were like, wink, wink, working together, were we not? Or did I miss something?
Jenna, am I reading Washington more wrong? I think Biden distanced us from Saudi Arabia and tried to get them to stop killing.
My electrician is here. Can we pause?
Sure.
So sorry to ruin that, Dave.
No.
I just had like a giant doorbell right as I went
Okay.
on. I will be back in less than 5 minutes.
Okay.
I'm really sorry.
Dave, why don't you and I continue?
Well, I
We have
want
more news?
Yeah, I've got more news.
Okay.
Didn't I send you enough news?
But just back to the Biden Saudi Arabia, that had to do with the assassination of the
Washington Post reporter,
yes, thank
who
you.
was also a prominent Saudi dissident,
Right.
and was killed and his body apparently broken into small pieces so it could be carried out from the Saudi embassy in Turkey, where he had come on official business.
Mm-hmm.
This is the nature.
Yeah. So it was that incident that interrupted what I think have been pretty positive relationships between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia for many years. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah.
The US had backed away, and Biden, inspired by the high oil price, probably thinking inflation was going to kill him in the next election, or kill the Democrats in the coming election, I should say, decided to heck with Democratic principles. They will be our friends.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, Jenna
Okay.
Leventoff is back with us, Dave. I know you had a couple of questions for her around some of the news items. Jenna, be sure and unmute yourself.
I'm unmuted. I'm ready.
Okay. Just remind our listeners, Jenna is Senior Policy Counsel at Public Knowledge. Jenna, maybe just a quick aside, tell us a little bit about Public Knowledge for those folks who don't know the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So I always say that Public Knowledge, we're a DC-based consumer advocacy organization. And I'd like to think of us as the bridge between consumer protection and technology. So if there's an issue related to making sure that that tech policy is working in favor of consumers, then this, Public Knowledge is it. So we work on things like making sure that everyone has access to affordable internet. We work on copyright policy and making sure that people have, fair access to that, antitrust, really the whole bridge of tech issues as it relates to consumers.
Mm-hmm. And your specialty is government affairs, is that correct?
Government affairs and also broadband. My specialty is broadband.
Okay.
And let's get to broadband because everybody's concerned about that. Let's give the easy one first. Jenna, if I qualify a charter for help under the new ACP subsidy, I could get a $100 subsidy to buy a Chromebook or a computer, but I can't because Tom Rutledge's charter has decided not to get involved and does not support that part of the ACP. How big a problem is that?
It's a huge problem. So Dave, I think I might backtrack a little bit and share more about what you're talking about, which is that as part of the Affordable Connectivity Program, which is a $30 broadband subsidy to low-income consumers, consumers can get a one-time $100 discount on a computer or a tablet. And how that winds up working is the consumer would have to get that computer or tablet from their internet service provider that they are getting the internet from.
The way the program was designed, if you signed up for the $30 subsidy from the ACP, and anybody up to double the poverty limit, that's $47,000 or $49,000 for a family of four, qualifies, as do anybody who lives in publicly supported housing. How many apartments of public housing do we have in New York?
Around 200,000, not counting all the Section 8 apartments that NYCHA also manages.
And every single one of them can get a free broadband connection because Charter nominally, that's the next story, will accept the $30, and Verizon and T-Mobile are talking about something similar. But we were listening to Jenna tell us about what the problem is with that program.
Yeah. So with the Affordable Connectivities Program device discount, each consumer will get a $100 discount on a computer or a tablet. And so what they have to get that through their provider that they're getting the Affordable Connectivity Program from. And so what essentially happens is most providers, Charter is not the only one, are not offering this device subsidy because providers just are not in the game of giving out computers and tablets. That's not what they do. They provide internet service. And so we're actually seeing that, most providers are not participating in this component of the program, which I think is really unfortunate because one of the key barriers to broadband connectivity is the lack of a device. I mean, if we're talking about people, the people that are getting the Affordable Connectivity Program are people that can't afford their monthly broadband service. That's probably $30 to $50 a month. If you can't afford that, how are you going to afford $500 to $1,000 that a computer costs? I mean, you can't. It's a prohibitive thing that comes all at one time. And so I feel like it's sort of the missing part of the equation here is that, you know, Congress and the administration, they're focused on making sure that everyone has broadband available, and that's fantastic. And then they are focused on making sure that broadband's affordable, and that's also fantastic. But until we get people these computers, I mean, they can't get online. You can't get online without a computer.
Mhm.
Well, you can get online with most cell phones today. In fact, that's how I'm on this show. But working on a cell phone to do all your homework is a little bit limited. $100 can buy you a refurb old computer. In fact, I just bought a portable for backup for when I travel again, for about $79 for Newegg. But I couldn't use that subsidy to buy anything from Newegg. Beyond that, there are lots of computers that are perfectly decent that you can buy from $150 to $300 from Dell, any retailer such as Newegg Online, which usually has something good. And frankly, for most people's practical purposes, e-learning, telemedicine, email, Facebook, swiping right or left, which is one of the most popular applications, that works fine on any of these machines, including the $150 machines. If you want to edit video, no, then you need $500 and $1,500 machines. But for most of what people do, the inexpensive machines are fine. Now, Charter and Comcast have had a program for several years that puts out inexpensive computers. I think Comcast was actually giving them away free as part of their program. So they certainly could have done it. They just decided they didn't want to. Sum this up for us, Jenna.
So the sum is that this is an optional component of the Affordable Connectivity Program. Providers do not have to offer the ACP participants a device. They can if they want to, they don't have to. And so Charter, along with most other internet service providers, have chosen not to. You know, and I think it's interesting, you were talking about you can buy more affordable refurbished devices, and you can, and that's actually something else that I've been working on in Congress that I think is really interesting. There's a bill called the Computers for Veterans and Students Act, the COVS Act. And essentially what that bill does is it will take old government computers that are outdated and it will provide them to nonprofit device refurbishers who will fix them up and then give them to consumers in need. So, you know, I think it is a great way of doing things, but it is a sort of separate track. And we're waiting to see that pass through Congress now.
Yeah, I was doing that about 35 years ago.
That's awesome.
We had a Computers for Social Change organization in New York, and we managed to get a lot of corporations that were upgrading to give us the old computers. It was a disaster because they were many different models of computers there. Nobody knew how to fix most of them. I happened to be in the business and could fix most of them. So they all tried to come to me to fix them for free. And sometimes it was hard for me to get parts and a whole lot of work, and they couldn't take it anywhere else because nobody else could fix them. It's not as bad as it was then. There are not that many brands of computers. They're pretty standard parts, so that fixing them won't be that hard. But it would be hard to make that program work. The cost of moving a computer, checking it out, getting it to somebody probably is not that much less than even if it's given away free, than the cost of buying some reasonable new equipment. Dell did have a $150 decent machine on sale when I looked 2 weeks ago. So great if the program works, I'm all for it. But don't count on that for too much. Now, let's go to the hard story. I found out, excuse me, that Charter in particular is happy if the ACP program, which provides a $30 service, which is fine, it's supposed to be 100 over 10, disappeared. And in fact, that's exactly what they're trying to make happen. They put out press releases that they're joining the program. I think you told me Joe Biden actually spoke with them about this. Say that, and the press release says they have a $30 service that will be great, free service for people who qualify for ACP. What it doesn't say, and I only discovered in the fine print when I was looking at things, and really small fine print and really deep in, say after 2 years it disappears. And you go up to $60 or $75, and to which you can apply the $30 subsidy, but is far too much for many people. Stu, you're working in the housing projects, you've worked in the South Bronx. How many people have a problem affording the $30 remainder charge after the ACP if we let Tom Rutledge get away with it?
You know, I would say a lot, Dave. I mean, the number of unconnected folks in public housing in New York City is astounding. It's been estimated at 50%. This was before the initiation of the ACP. I don't know to what degree that has ameliorated, but it was a huge problem when you're looking at a population somewhere around 500,000 people, half of whom don't have internet at home. And a good bit of the problem, if not the most significant aspect of that, is affordability. So $30 a month can be a bit of a struggle for folks who are at the poverty line. The average income of public housing folks is $25,000. That's right at the poverty line. Half the folks in public housing are unemployed. So, you know, to some folks, $30 may not seem a lot, but if you're struggling to keep food on the table, to pay your doctor bills, to keep your kids fed and pay your medical bills and transportation bills, that can be a big hurdle. So I would say, Dave, if that disappeared, it's going to have a huge impact on the public housing population and others as well. It's not just public housing residents, but there are other low-income folks in New York City as well that I think the New York City themselves last year estimated, I'm not sure what the numbers were, Dave, but you may recall when the city was talking about their internet master plan, they threw out some staggering numbers of folks that are unconnected, like in the millions, that are unconnected. And the principal problem is affordability. Now, so for that program to disappear, that's a big deal.
Yeah, there's going to be chaos if it actually plays like that.
Yeah,
I strongly recommend Jessica Rosenworcel demands a meeting with Tom Rutledge's charter and gets this changed. But Tom is really squeezing out every last dollar to keep the profits at charter up. He's 68 years old, ready to retire, but the stock has gone down, and that's going to affect what his future pension is.
yeah.
So he hasn't retired. I don't know for sure that's the reason, but it makes sense. And he was very resistant. I got in a deep argument for a week with somebody at Charter before they said, oh yes, now we decided we're going to join the program. But now I'm finding there's lots of issues. Now, beside Jessica calling Tom Rutledge, which is probably the way something like this could be fixed most easily, Jenna, what should the government be doing?
Well, I think the thing to note is that, no matter what Charter is doing, the Affordable Connectivity Program is a temporary program. It was only funded for 5 years or until the money runs out. And that could be well less than, 5 years. because I think we have fantastic uptick. We have 13 million households that are enrolled in the Affordable Connectivity Program. But unfortunately, with every new household enrolled in the program, the money could run out faster. So, I mean, this is really an issue for Congress and the FCC to take up. They need to figure out, how are we going to continue this program? If we're not continuing this program, how are we going to make sure that there is a separate subsidy that will cover the full cost of, the internet for low income consumers? So, my organization, Public Knowledge, has advocated for essentially modifying, there's already a program called Lifeline, and that program offers $9.25 for broadband. It's almost always used for mobile phones. And we've suggested modifying that program to be more like ACP. The big difference here is how those are funded. So the Affordable Connectivity Program was funded by Congress. However, this Lifeline is funded through what's called the Universal Service Fund. So that's an assessment. If you have a phone, you probably see on your phone bill something called the Universal Service Fee. And so we collect money from all these phone users and use that for a couple of government programs that help promote broadband connectivity. And in our mind, that's just a more stable way of funding things, because as we know with Congress, sometimes things get done and sometimes things don't get done. And so, when you're relying on Congress to be funding such an important program, that just seems a little bit risky to us.
Okay, guys, we gotta take a brief break, Dave. We're at the halfway point here. So this is Community and Technology with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid. We're speaking with Jenna Leventoff, who's the Senior Policy Counsel at Public Knowledge. We're gonna take a brief break and be right back. This is WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. Stay tuned. Okay, we're back. This is Community Technology. Stu Reid, Dave Burstein. We're speaking with Jenna Leventoff, a senior policy counsel with Public Knowledge, a 501c3 not-for-profit that promotes freedom of expression and open internet and access to affordable communication tools and creative works. Before the break, we were talking about the Affordable Connectivity Program, also called ACP, which subsidizes $30 a month for broadband. And Jenna was explaining that the program is only funded for 5 years or until the money runs out, which could be sooner. And was suggesting and talking about how her organization, Public Knowledge, is advocating for another way to fund that program. Currently, it's congressional authorization, but there are other FCC subsidies, such as the Lifeline program, as Jenna was explaining, that are funded by Universal Service Fund. So Jenna, tell us a little bit more about that, and is there a proposal on the table, or is this just something that you guys are kicking around, or where are we with talking about other alternative ways to continue the ACP program?
Very much, and by we, I mean the tech policy field as a whole is very much in the beginning phases of figuring out how we're going to extend this subsidy. I think everyone's still in a place of trying to implement the subsidy that we did recently pass and figure out how to make sure that that works and helps as many people as possible. So a lot of people aren't ready to have the conversation of what comes next. But I don't think it's too early to be thinking about what comes next. I think we have to start now because it takes a while to get these things done. You know, the FCC just released a report yesterday where they had to respond to comments about sort of what is the future of this Universal Service Fund. I haven't had a chance to dig in fully, but it seems like a lot of it they kind of left for future determination. So I'd say we're very much in the beginning of this conversation, but I think it's a conversation I'd urge folks that have the power to start having.
Dave, what do you think about that?
Well, did the proposal have a way to save about half of the money that's wasted on subsidies for small telcos and is wildly inflated in order to come up with the funds they need? Or how did they want to fund it?
So right now, we mostly just assess phone service, which, as you know, less and less people are adopting phone service right now. So what we have proposed, along with more than 200 other groups, is actually starting to assess broadband revenues as well. So the FCC would take a small cut from all of the revenue that telecoms bring in for broadband service, which is significantly higher than what they're bringing in for phone service. And in that way, we can continue to fund all of the existing programs and, you know, increase the Lifeline subsidy, modify the rules so that it functions more like the Affordable Connectivity Program. We've also encouraged the FCC to create a device voucher program. I mean, like I said earlier in the show, people can't get online unless they have a computer, and it's a real struggle to afford one. So, you know, we think the FCC is a really great place to start a program that would get people the devices they need to connect.
Mm-hmm. Currently, there's no tax, at least no federal tax on broadband services. Is that right, Jenna? I think there's no sales tax.
Kevin Martin killed it a number of years ago and excluded broadband, saying we have to bring the price of broadband down for people to afford it.
Right.
What happened was virtually the day that tax disappeared, the major phone companies raised their price by almost exactly the same month. Martin yelled and screamed. Well, no, he was much more polite about it. They held off on their increase, and then a year or two later, they put the increase through, as well as their regular increases. Back then, you could get a broadband connection for $17 and $20. Now, the cheapest thing you can get, except through the programs, from Verizon or from Charter, which are our local service provider, it's almost the same in the rest of the country, is $60. So the high price of broadband is one of the reasons it's so hard for people to get connected. How much do you think it would take to implement the programs you're talking about, how much of a fee would have to be added to each non-subsidized broadband subscription in the US?
So I think that's the great thing about spreading it out over broadband revenues is that if you do that, there's so many people that are subscribed to broadband that it's, you know, it's going to be a pretty minimal impact on each individual household.
$5 or $10 a month, you think?
Probably less than that, probably $1 to $2.
I got to look at those numbers to see. We can't
Yeah,
do that.
there's a report about it.
Yeah. You can, yeah.
Dave,
Okay.
Dave, what is the USF? What's the average USF hit on folks' phone bills these days? We have any idea what that is?
Massive. What's the current rate? I think it's something like 30%. Jenna, do you know?
It's over 35%.
Wow.
It's getting pretty close to 40, so it's massive.
Yeah. Now, the advantage of doing it that way, which would still be true if it was on broadband, is that some of that is a tax that's paid by the consumers, but the phone companies can't pass it all along as a practical matter. So some of it comes out of the profits of the companies. Probably most of it gets passed through to consumers. Now, in the talk about how to get the money for the Universal Service Fund, for the last 15 years, people like Scott Walton and academics like Greg Burstein have been pointing out something I can confirm from experience, that the level of subsidies for the rural phone service are utterly ridiculous. Nobody has put a number on it except me. I'm willing to go on the record saying it's between 1/2 and 3/4. And I've actually worked with some of the smaller phone companies, but most of that money doesn't go to the smaller phone companies. Jenna, do you know how much of the universal service support goes to the bells as opposed to the small companies?
I don't have an exact figure for that. You know, what I do know is that it's not really, you know, it's about having competition, and it's about really holding whoever does get this money accountable for deploying broadband, but high quality broadband, right? So if we're giving out all of this money and providers are using it to build these slow networks, and then in 5 years they ask for even more money to build a network that now meets the speeds that consumers expect, that's the kind of thing that I think is unacceptable, right? So, you know, we want competitive providers to win these grants, but we ultimately want whoever to win them who's going to build the broadband. And so like, we want to see the FCC really holding people accountable for building broadband when they say they're going to, and building it to speeds that are actually going to meet the needs of consumers.
Yeah. I've been working on some numbers, and there was a useful study that I just saw that says that we'll get decent broadband to at least 99% of the population. All of those who have no choice but satellite, except for the last 1% perhaps, are going to be covered. And most of those that have less than 100/20 megabits will also be covered. And most of what's going to be built is going to be fiber, because wireless doesn't turn out to work very well for the extreme rural areas. I don't know. I don't think Washington realizes that. People in Aspen were just talking about how fixed wireless for unserved would bring the cost down, but they have no data on what the actual cost of fixed wireless in extreme rural areas is. Jenna, let's change the subject a little bit, because that's something that a lot of people are talking about. Should the requirement be 100/20? Should it be 100, which can be met by about 90% of the United States, because that's what cable is designed for? The number of underserved that's about to come out of the FCC fabric is exaggerated for reasons that I haven't been able to figure out. But the numbers coming out are going to be much too high there. That's a whole separate discussion. Is 100 over 20 adequate for most people for the next 5 or 10 years?
So I think the thing that we have to keep in mind is that after COVID, people are doing more things like video chatting and doing a lot of things that require more upload speeds than we've ever needed before. So it's going to depend a lot on how many people are in your family. The more people that are doing these things simultaneously, the higher bandwidth you need. So if you're one person or maybe two people and you're sitting at home and you're both on a Zoom call, 100 over 20 is more than sufficient. If you're someone with 5, 6 people and a smart refrigerator and a smart washing machine and a Ring doorbell and insert other things here, I mean, maybe not. So what Public Knowledge has really been advocating for is symmetrical speeds. We think it's important that those upload speeds are just as high as the download speeds because we do so many things now that require higher upload speeds.
Even if you say we need higher upload speeds than 20, which is a number we can look at, if the upload speed is 100 megabits, why does it have to be symmetrical as opposed to, for example, a gigabit down and 100 up?
I think
because remember, all cable networks these days are built for close to a gigabit down.
I mean, what we want to see ultimately is fiber here. I think fiber is probably one of the technologies that's going to be the most cost effective over time, because right now with cable and a lot of the other technologies, we're limited, right? So if we're in 20 years from now, and I want to rebut what you said of, is this going to be sufficient for the next 5 to 10 years? That's not really a question that I care about. I care about, is this going to be sufficient for 20, 30, 50, 100 years, right? I mean, we're spending literally billions of dollars of tax money. And so we want to make sure that we're using that in the most financially responsible way. And so I think when we focus on fiber builds, we haven't met the speeds. Our technology cannot yet meet the speeds that fiber can offer. And so we can keep improving our technology, and a fiber network is just going to keep on working because physics, that's frankly,
What do you think of the lifetime of fiber? The industry usually puts it at about 25 years before there's enough corrosion and it's become too obsolete to keep using it. What number are you putting in there?
I haven't read many estimates about that.
Yeah, but there's some people who are turning around and saying that fiber is going to last forever. And that's totally unknown because, among other things, at least in dense areas, you can get a gigabit just fine with wireless at this point. Millimeter wave 5G can do that easily, and Verizon is proving that. In fact, I saw some tests that went to 3 gigabits on Verizon millimeter wave. And people may decide in 10 years, why do I need a landline? Why don't I just have one wireless? So we don't know that fiber is going to be great 20 years from now. It probably will be, but we have to be careful what we're saying there. But let's go back to that. How many people need more than 20 megabits upstream in the next 5 to 10 years?
Probably almost everybody.
Well, let's look at some numbers. 20 megabits upstream is enough for 6 Zoom connections, a whole lot of surfing, and you still have 5 or 10 megabits left. Remember, Zoom is only about 1 megabit. And that's what we're talking about for upstream. So why do you say most people, and you're going to have IoT coming, you're going to have these 20 devices, but anything that isn't video, like the babysitter camera, tends to use very little bandwidth, and that only intermittently. So let's say 6 Zooms and 3 IoT videos, like the camera, you still fit in 20 megabits just fine.
I think you're using today's technology. We don't know what tomorrow's technology is going to be, but I mean, you see the need for upload speeds grow dramatically. It was probably 3 to 5 megabits just 5, 10 years ago. And now it's at least 20. So we don't know. I mean, for all we know in the future, I'm going to be talking to you via holograph, and that could use all sorts of upload data. So we want to be prepared for that. I don't think that it's really worth it to be using government funding to build something that's maybe hitting it for just now or slightly into the future.
Well, what is the current FCC standard, minimum standard for broadband?
So I think they are talking about raising it to 100 over 20, but I think it's still currently 25.3, which is indisputably not enough.
25.3 is a problem because if you have two kids and an adult doing a Zoom call, you start getting in trouble with 3. That definitely should go up to at least 10. But whether it should go over 20, it's a hard question. How would you write legislation to make it go up to higher? In other words, are you going to require fiber because you think it's going to be more valuable 15 years from now? Or do you think the upgrade of a cable system, which can easily go to 100 upstream and can go to a gigabit upstream, and is cheap, it should also be allowed?
I think there's a lot of debate in our community about that. Our organization, we're technology neutral. So whichever speeds can meet the thresholds that we think consumers are going to demand into the future, we're happy with. So whether that's fiber, whether that's fixed wireless, whether that's cable, whether that's some technology that hasn't been invented yet, if it can do it, cool.
Yeah, fixed wireless. We now have 2 million people who've connected to Verizon and T-Mobile, or almost 2 million, on their $50 a month service. Where does that fit in? How much of the US do you think will be covered? At 100 over 20, which I think is a good point because it's very cheap to get to.
The FCC has statistics about this stuff.
I'm sorry?
The FCC will have statistics about how many people have 100 over 20 service.
No, I'm talking about 3 years from now. Remember, we've got T-Mobile committed as a Sprint bill to go to 100 megabits downstream to 90% of the United States. And Verizon and AT&T, for competitive reasons, are probably going to match it. I know the technology, it mostly works. I tested out at 300 and 400 megabits down on T-Mobile 5G. It's hard to do to cell edges and to extreme rural, so they're committed to go to 90%. What role when T-Mobile has the 90% coverage, and they're in most places an alternative to that, how much of that meets what you need?
I mean, I think that there's always going to be, what I think the heart of your question is there's always going to be areas that are unserved. There's always going to be areas that are too rural or too poor for providers who want to serve them, unless, someone else is coming in and paying for that. So I don't think no matter what new technology we have and how far a company claims they're going to make it go across the country, we're going to have people that aren't connected unless the government steps in.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's going to be, assuming that, that's going to be somewhere between 3 and 7%, most of whom, in fact, nearly all of whom, are going to be picked up by the existing funding going through NTIA. No?
Well, again,
how many unserved people do you think we'll have?
I think it's going to depend on what the states do with their money. So some of the money that Congress allocated, there was over $42 billion for broadband deployment. The states get their own money and they can kind of do what they will with that money from a number of different uses. And so I think some states will use that money more effectively than others. And it's all going to come down to really how the states use that money, what technologies they use, where they build out, how good the data they have already is about who has broadband and who doesn't, whether they use that funding for affordability, for devices. I mean, there's so many uses for that money in so many different scenarios in every state that I think it's hard to put a number on things. I know I can tell you want a number, but I don't think that we can give a number. I think there's a lot of unknowns. There's 50 states and a number of territories. And
actually, there's a whole lot of fiber that's been built till now. And I actually worked 10 years ago on a project in Vermont. So we know what fiber costs up to 98, 99%. And we do have numbers, and we easily get to 98, 99% with the existing funding. In fact, it probably leaves a fair amount over to
But
upgrade some.
that's a policy question, right? Is like, are the states going to use it for fiber? We don't know. Are the states going to give the money to companies that actually complete their build outs? We also don't know. So I think there's a lot of policy questions that we just don't know.
Yeah.
But
Okay,
the big
guys,
policy-
Dave and
Yeah.
Jenna, we're just about out of time. So any final questions for Jenna, Dave? Jenna, any final comments?
Let me go and get a comment before Jenna, so she has the last word. Getting everybody connected is worth a great deal. Doing it efficiently and not wasting money is something that Washington has to look at. By my calculations, at least 5 and more likely 15 or $20 billion of the NTIA funding is avoidable if we, for example, use satellite for the last 0.5%. And they just approved a project in Alaska for $80,000 per home passed. Is it worth $80,000 to upgrade somebody from satellite to fiber? I think that family and that tribe and our country would be better off if they got satellite and the money was given, half of that $80,000 was given to them or spent on housing, which is a very big need in our country. Jenna, you've got the last word.
I love the last word. You know, I think for me, there's just so much at play here with getting people connected that we couldn't even start to cover it in this 1 hour radio show. You know, do people have the internet? You know, how is that getting built? Is it available? Is it affordable? Do they have a device? Do people know how to use a computer? Like, all of these things are playing in. And then, you know, are your networks working? Do they turn on when you need them to turn on? If there's a natural disaster, are they continuing to work, or are they back up quickly? There's so much to this debate that my last word is to really think about this issue broadly for policymakers. If you're a policymaker and you are trying to close the digital divide, you can't think that any one thing that we can do is going to close it. This is a multifaceted problem, and I really want to see action on a lot of fronts. And I want to see the discussion turning to be about more than just, oh, should we deploy with fiber or should we deploy with satellite? To an extent, I don't care. And there's way more to it than that. And I think a lot of people get really caught up in that debate. So that's my last word. Think about this as a multifaceted problem.
And we
Thank
all
you,
agree
Jenna.
that we have to get internet to as many people as possible, almost everybody. That we can all agree on. The how may be the question.
Yes, and the last point that Jenna was making is more than just the internet. It's the devices, it's the education, it's how to use it, and how to actually apply it to improving your life. So, but all that's for another discussion. I want to thank you, Jenna, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, we've been speaking with Jenna Leventoff, Senior Policy Counsel with Public Knowledge. This has been Community and Technology with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. Stay tuned. Every Wednesday, 5 to 6 p.m. Thanks for tuning in. Good night.